Stranger Things, across alternate timelines. Across the multiverse, Stranger Things exists not as a single nostalgic series, but as a collection of parallel reflections, each one born from a different fracture in culture, technology, and fear. In this episode, we explore 5 alternate timeline variants. Stranger Things didn't just echo the past, it split into echoes of its own throughout the fractured multiverse. Echo Vault Briefing. Alternate timeline variants of Stranger Things. Vault Strand Group. EL11/Minddrift Cluster. Alternate timeline variant 1. Stranger Things. Montauk Protocol. Echo timeline designation. ST-MNTK-PRT. Historical divergence point, 1979. The real-world Montauk project reached operational phase success in this timeline. Instead of being shut down as urban myth, it led to classified breakthroughs in temporal dissonance mapping and memory echo containment. This success permanently altered the US government's approach to Cold War psychic warfare, pushing black-budget funding into dreamwalkers, not nukes. This shift diverted public fascination away from 1980s nostalgia by the 2010s and more into paranoid time-bleed folklore. The show is created not as a retro homage, but as a recovered narrative meant to warn or prepare. Overview. Series renamed Montauk and released in 2014, set entirely in Long Island, New York. Alternate history. The Montauk Project, 1971 to 1983, in this timeline involved leaked tales from whistleblowers of dimensional breaches and child subjects pulled from parallel timelines being trained in psychic warfare. In this world, the project went public briefly in 2005 during a leak known as the Time Wave declassification. The town of Montauk became sealed to the public in 2009, following a spatial collapse event. The series was produced by the Duffer Brothers using redacted documents smuggled out by whistleblowers. In this timeline, Netflix doesn't exist. This timeline's Montauk show was distributed through a red box-like kiosk service called Black Signal, starting in 2014. Notable changes. 11 is a mute boy named Jacob, whose abilities include dreamwalking and remote vision. Government facility is built under an abandoned radar tower off the Montauk coast. Greater emphasis on psychic Cold War espionage, recovered alien artifacts, and time bleed. Inspired by the actual Montauk Project conspiracy lore, Philadelphia experiment, time portals. Each season explores a deeper loop collapse as reality begins rewriting itself. 10 notable scenes from this alternate timeline variant. Scene 1. Jacob walks into the dream of a drowned boy and sees the moment of death repeating endlessly, the water always rising but never filling his lungs. Scene 2. Jacob's adoptive father, a janitor at the radar base, realizes the boy isn't aging and may be an echo from a prior failed loop. Scene 3. Episode 2 flashback. A Soviet psychic stares into a cracked mirror and screams as their face begins to melt into the reflection. Scene 4. A former technician turned hermit, obsessed with tuning into the true frequency, warns the kids they're not people, they're replays. Scene 5. A cold radar tower emits distorted audio of the character's own thoughts, days before they think them. Scene 6. A psychic link forms between Jacob and a girl in 1952 who insists she's part of the original experiment. Scene 7. Jacob finds a room filled with aged Polaroids of himself and the others, from timelines where they didn't survive. Scene 8. Jacob communicates using chalk and an old reel-to-reel recorder, playing distorted snippets of alternate lives. Scene 9. Season 2 finale. A looping corridor sequence where characters try to leave the base, but each door opens to a slightly worse version of their home. Scene 10. Season 3 finale. Jacob willingly sacrifices himself by entering the core loop chamber, dissolving into static as reality reboots one last time, with none of the characters remembering he ever existed, except the janitor. Reception in that world. Critically revered for its cerebral depth and unique blend of conspiracy horror and emotional isolation. Season 3 finale, where Jacob erases himself to reset the broken timeline, became a modern myth. Alternate timeline variant 2. Stranger Things. Shadowgate. Echo timeline designation STSHDWG84. Historical divergence point 2014. The indie horror film It Follows becomes a breakout cultural and financial phenomenon in this timeline, prompting studios to aggressively greenlight slow-burn, nihilistic R-rated horror for television. As a result, Netflix pivots away from family-friendly nostalgia programming and instead commissions Shadowgate as a prestige psychological horror series, explicitly rejecting Spielbergian warmth in favor of existential dread. Overview. Major tonal shift. An R-rated horror adaptation greenlit after It Follows' success. Alternate history. Shadowgate is developed as a reimagining, not an homage, to 1980s horror, drawing instead from Carpenter, Cronenberg, and European doom cinema. The Duffer Brothers collaborate with practical effects artists from The Thing, 1982, and industrial sound designers. The show is framed as a containment failure chronicle, leaked from Hawkins National Laboratory. Marketing is minimal. No toys, no nostalgia branding, just cryptic VHS trailers and body horror imagery. The series runs 3 seasons, each darker than the last, before being quietly canceled despite critical praise. Notable changes. Visual style inspired by The Thing and Silent Hill. Demogorgon is biomechanical, referred to as the sibling. 11 experiences violent outbursts and recursive guilt hallucinations. Will dies at the end of Season 1. The Upside Down is a sentient anti-consciousness communicating through rot, mold, and decay. Notable line. Season 2. You didn't bring him back. You brought back the wound that wore him. 10 notable scenes from this alternate timeline variant. Scene 1. A deceased deer found in the woods reanimates on the examination table, metal-like tendrils unfolding from its ribcage as it attempts to crawl back into the soil. Scene 2. Joyce refuses to accept Will's passing, but slowly realizes the thing communicating with her isn't her son. It's the wound he left behind, learning how to mimic grief. Scene 3. The sibling is revealed assembling itself from stolen bones and machine parts, emitting a distorted childlike breathing through its chest cavity. Scene 4. Hopper confesses he knew Will was dead for hours before telling Joyce, choosing containment over mercy. Scene 5. A wall inside Hawkins' lab sweats blood and rust, spelling messages in corrosion. I remember you. Scene 6. 11 learns her powers didn't open the gate. They merely answered something already knocking. Scene 7. A possessed corpse speaks through fungal growths bursting from its mouth, warning that death is the only closed door. Scene 8. Nancy burns all photographs of Will, realizing images are acting as anchors for the Upside Down to bleed through. Scene 9. Season 2 cold open. Eleven wanders a vision loop where every person she saved appears half decayed, accusing her in overlapping whispers. Scene 10. Season 3 finale. 11 seals the Shadowgate by cutting herself off from empathy, severing her humanity to starve the invading consciousness, leaving her alive, but emotionally hollow. Reception. Cult hit. Deeply admired by horror purists and critics, but too bleak for mass audiences. Frequently cited in that world as the show that went too far and told the truth anyway. Alternate Timeline Variant 3. Stranger Things. Hellschool. Echo Timeline Designation. STHLLSC88. Historical Divergence Point. 1988. The unexpected success of A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 through 5. Even larger box office returns and cultural ripples than our timeline's versions, and the success of 1990s syndicated teen horror shows in this timeline convinces studios long-term that high school is the safest, most marketable horror setting. When the Hawkins concept is pitched decades later, executives immediately mandate a team-centric, episodic Monster of the Week format, rejecting grounded mystery in favor of loud genre tropes. Overview. Executives forced a Buffy-style high school horror tone from the start. Alternate history. The series is developed as a network TV property, not prestige streaming. Writers are required to keep episodes self-contained, with recurring school-based threats. Tone is dictated by toy manufacturers and comic licensors from day one. Lore is inconsistent, but iconography is aggressively branded. The show runs 6 seasons, constantly rebooting its own mythology whenever ratings dip. Notable changes. Episodes have deliberately cheesy titles. Locker 113, Prom of the Damned, The Detention. The Mind Flayer manifests as Principal Hargreave, possessed by an ancient shadow demon. Every season finale either destroys, seals, or reopens Hawkins High. Catchphrase repeated relentlessly. Weird's just Wednesday at Hawkins High. 10 notable scenes from this alternate timeline variant. Scene 1. A possessed locker bank opens simultaneously, releasing hundreds of writhing shadow tendrils that grab students by their backpacks. Scene 2. The core friend group knowingly covers up supernatural events to avoid summer school, prioritizing grades over survival. Scene 3. The principal's shadow detaches during morning announcements and slithers across the ceiling, spelling detentions in black slime. Scene 4. 11 defeats a demon by weaponizing teen peer pressure, forcing it to manifest physically so it can be stabbed. Scene 5. The gym floor collapses during a pep rally, revealing a hellish under-school dimension full of chanting silhouettes in Letterman jackets. Scene 6. A popular bully is briefly redeemed after being possessed, only to be expelled anyway, teaching the lesson that high school is more cruel than hell. Scene 7. A substitute teacher melts into chalk dust, reforming on the blackboard as a screaming face begging students not to forget him. Scene 8. A guidance counselor reveals she's been alive since the 1700s and just keeps changing schools whenever they burn down. Scene 9. Season 4 finale. The school is phased halfway into the upside down, lockers fused with organic growth, and class bells tolling on their own. Scene 10. Series finale. Hawkins High explodes one last time, only to be immediately rebuilt in the closing shot. The cycle unbroken. Reception. Critically panned, frequently mocked for inconsistency and tone whiplash. However, massive merchandise success, Lunchboxes, comics, sneakers, trapper keepers. Cult following among teens. Viewed as the American Horror Story for kids in that world. Still hosts annual fan conventions, cosplay heavy and nostalgia fueled. Alternate timeline variant 4. Stranger Things Resonance. Echo timeline. Designation STRSNNCL3. Historical divergence point 2012. New emerging theories in quantum consciousness and trauma memory research converged and gained prominence in this timeline by mid-2012, reframing paranormal phenomena as observer-dependent emotional feedback loops. As a result, the Duffer Brothers' pitch is retooled during development. The Upside Down is no longer a parallel dimension, but a resonance state created when intense emotional trauma collapses probability. Overview. The Upside Down is not a place. It's emotion-based quantum feedback. Alternate history. The reworking of the pitch resulted in some of the following alterations to the plot. Government experiments in Hawkins were not opening portals, but amplifying psychic trauma to weaponize emotional resonance. Children like 11 were never subjects. They were unintentional amplifiers. Death does not remove characters from the narrative. It repositions them as memory anchors. The show becomes increasingly non-linear each season, abandoning traditional causality. Later seasons openly acknowledge multiple timelines bleeding together through shared emotional scars. Notable changes. Every horror event is tied to unresolved grief, abuse, or psychic rupture. 11 fractures into multiple cells representing different emotional survivals. Dustin narrates Season 3 posthumously after dying in Season 2. Season 4 centers on the Mirror House, a non-place reflecting psychic wounds across timelines. Tone is dreamlike, melancholic, and emotionally surreal, closer to Donnie Darko than Spielberg. 10 notable scenes from this alternate timeline variant. Scene 1. A bedroom slowly inverts during a panic attack, walls folding inward as whispered regrets manifest as shadow figures pressing from behind the wallpaper. Scene 2. Dustin's Season 3 narration is revealed to be a memory echo, a version of himself who survived and is guiding the group from behind the veil of another world toward healing rather than victory. Scene 3. The Upside Down briefly appears as a field of floating childhood objects, each vibrating violently when someone remembers why they mattered. Scene 4. Mike realizes the Upside Down reacts strongest not to fear, but to unspoken love, forcing him to confront what he never said. Scene 5. A character tries to escape the Mirror House, only to realize every door opens to the moment they were emotionally broken, not physically harmed. Scene 6. Lucas forgives a version of himself from another timeline, collapsing a resonance node and saving the group without violence. Scene 7. 11 encounters a version of herself who never escaped the lab, not hostile, just tired, asking why survival hurts so much. Scene 8. The fragmented 11s reunite briefly, agreeing that no single version gets to be the real one. Scene 9. A resonance surge causes the town to relive multiple deaths simultaneously, overlapping screams and silences as time fractures into emotional layers. Scene 10. Series finale. Hawkins stabilizes not because the threat is defeated, but because the characters remember each other honestly, allowing the resonance field to dissipate. Reception. Critics and scholars analyze the series like poetry or dream literature. Fans nickname it the story that remembers you, often cited in that world as one of the most emotionally devastating and cathartic television experiences ever produced. Alternate Timeline Variant 5. Stranger Things, VHS. Echo Timeline Designation, STVHSALT5. Historical Divergence Point, 1985. After the cult success of early cable access horror anthology series like Tales from the Dark Side and The Twilight Zone, 1985, reboot, a unique wave of independent horror creators begins distributing experimental horror shows on VHS, circumventing network censors. By 1990, an alternate, analog horror underground forms. A pipeline of self-funded shows with uncanny tone, surreal PSA inserts, and anti-corporate, anti-reality undertones. When the Duffer Brothers emerge in the 2000s, they join a reconstructionist horror movement that only uses legacy analog tech. Overview. All episodes are filmed with actual 1980s filming equipment and 1980s-style practical effects, aired like a public access-style broadcast. Alternate history. Stranger Things VHS is filmed on Beta SP and SVHS, edited using razor blades, and distributed in small runs via mail-order box sets and early live-stream tape loop experiments. There is no Netflix. The series premieres on a pirate public access network called Dead Channel 7 in 2015. The show is believed by many in that timeline to be a signal weapon, or ARG. Its visuals known to cause déjà vu, emotion drift, and memory slippage. Schools and mental health clinics later adopt episodes as treatment tools for dissociation and trauma recall, thanks to the PSA's hypnotic, comforting cadence. Notable changes. Every episode begins with worn VHS music and tape static. 4:3 aspect ratio is permanent, with tracking warbles and muffled mono audio. All effects are 100% practical, even for body horror and creature designs. Each episode ends with an eerie, uncanny retro PSA narrated by cast members, covering topics like, "Don't forget your dreams. Stay in school, even if you've already left. Not all families are real." 10 notable scenes from this alternate timeline variant. Scene 1. A commercial break abruptly cuts to a scene of Eleven's face looping in reverse, glitching between smiles and screams while a voice says, "This is what forgetting looks like." Scene 2. Mike finds a VHS labeled, "If you watch this, you never existed." And by the next episode, the cast doesn't recognize him. Scene 3. The Demogorgon is a rubber-suited man with exposed light bulbs in his torso, flickering in sync with distorted school announcements. Scene 4. Joyce delivers a PSA about single motherhood while walking through a visibly burning version of her own home. Scene 5. The static between scenes becomes sentient in Season 2, appearing as a tape ghost that walks frame to frame through unrelated plot lines. Scene 6. Will becomes aware he's being filmed, starts directly addressing the camera with increasingly accurate predictions of future episodes. Scene 7. Dustin uncovers a VCR inside a buried locker, which only plays memories he doesn't remember having. Scene 8. Season 3 finale. 11 erases herself from the broadcast tape, but her outline remains burned into the static of every scene after. Scene 9. A slow-motion cafeteria sequence. Food floats mid-air while all sound drops out, replaced with a 1970s educational reel about social belonging. Scene 10. The last PSA is delivered by a crying Hopper, who stares into the lens and whispers, "You were always here, even when the screen was dark." Reception. Obscure during its run, passed between collectors and horror nerds, now widely regarded as an Echo masterwork, unmatched in format commitment and analog surrealism. Used in some experimental therapy programs for media dissociation and identity healing, frequently called the tape that watches you back. Somewhere out there, a VHS flickers in an empty room. Somewhere, a boy named Jacob never speaks, and still saves the world. Somewhere, the school explodes again. Until next time, keep your lantern lit. And remember, the story that remembers you is still unfolding.